Welcome back to UGC Net English class. In the previous class, we discussed T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Today we have the biography of John Milton to discuss. John Milton, 1608 to 1674. He is a Renaissance period writer, which means Renaissance period, English Renaissance, 1500 to 1660. Milton was a passionately individual Christian humanist poet. So in one sentence, we can say, when someone asks, who is Milton? John Milton was a passionately individual Christian humanist poet. And John Milton, besides writing in English, he had also written works in Latin, Greek, and Italian. And he mastered all these languages himself. Writing in English, Latin, Greek, and Italian. Now Milton's grand style is important. So what is Milton's grand style? In Paradise Lost and such epic works, we can see Milton using grand style. Numerous references and allusions, complex vocabulary, complicated grammatical constructions, and extended similes and images. So grand style means you can see numerous references and allusions, complex vocabulary, complicated grammatical constructions, and extended similes and images. So they will use different difficult vocabulary. And so many references to the Bible and such great works. And a grammar will be complicated. Especially Milton used the style of grammar that was basically the style of Latin grammar. So Latin grammar style he used. According to the Latin grammar, verb comes only last. And in Milton's grand style, we can see extended similes and images. It was the poet Matthew Arnold who first mentioned about Milton's grand style. So remember, it was Matthew Arnold who first talked of Milton's grand style. And Milton acquired a stature as an epic poet. Milton is famous for his epic poems, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, etc. He worked as a civil servant and as a teacher. He was born in Bread Street, London. Milton's parents were John Milton Sr. and his wife Sarah Jeffrey. John Milton and Sarah Jeffrey were the parents of John Milton. Milton married 3 times. His first wife was Mary Powell, and they had 4 children, but Mary died. So Milton married his second wife, Catherine Woodcock. She had 1 daughter, but both Catherine and the daughter died. So Milton married a 3rd time, Elizabeth Minshull or Betty Minshull. Milton was a Puritan. Religious views. Milton's religious views, we can see he was a religiously a Puritan. And Milton believed that he was born to be a poet. From very younger age, he wanted to become a poet. Milton attended St. Paul's School in London. As a teenager, Milton began writing an epic poem in Latin about the gunpowder plot. The title is Quintum Novembris. That means remember, remember, which is unfinished. So, as a teenager, Milton began writing an epic poem in Latin about the gunpowder plot, titled Quintum Novembris. Remember, remember, which is unfinished. Milton went to Christ's College, Cambridge. He was so fair that his college mates called him the Lady of Christ's College because of his long hair and his, very fair face. His friends and college mates called him Lady of Christ's College. For his Cambridge friend, Milton wrote the poem Lycidas. When one of Milton's Cambridge friends, Edward King, died, Milton composed the poem Lycidas to mourn the death of Edward King. Remember, it is important. Then Milton traveled extensively around Europe. In 1638, while in Florence, Milton met Galileo. Milton recorded his meeting with Galileo in his 1644 pamphlet Areopagitica. So remember, in 1638, while in Florence, Milton met Galileo Galilei. Then Milton recorded his meeting with Galileo in his 1644 pamphlet Areopagitica. Milton was a big defender of freedom of speech and expression. This we can see in his work Areopagitica. So here in Areopagitica, he speaks for the freedom of this press, freedom of speech, freedom to publish works, and such ideas he projects. After college, 6 years of self-directed private study. So Milton spent too much time for private study. Even after late night, he used to sit before books. And this was one of the central reasons for his early blindness. We know that Milton became totally blind after 45, passing his 45th year. So his extensive study was one of the reasons for his blindness. Milton's first poem to appear in print was Epitaph on the admirable dramatic poet W. Shakespeare, published in 1630. This was included in the second folio edition of Shakespeare's plays in 1632. So, first printed work of Milton was Epitaph on the admirable dramatic poet W. Shakespeare, and which was included in the second folio edition of William Shakespeare's plays. And Milton served as a civil servant for the Commonwealth of England under Oliver Cromwell. By 1652, Milton had become totally blind because of glaucoma. Because of untreated glaucoma, he became totally blind. by around 1652 when he was around 45 years. Milton was neither a clergyman nor a theologian. However, theology and particularly English Calvinism formed the palette on which John Milton created his greatest thoughts. So remember, Milton was neither a clergyman nor a theologian. However, theology and particularly English Calvinism formed the palette on which Milton created his greatest thoughts. In John Milton's works, we can divide it into three types: shorter poems, prose works, and longer poems. To his shorter poems, we can include his sonnets like On His Blindness and such poems, and his prose works like Areopagitica. And his longer poems, we can include Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and such works. And Milton has contributed some new words to English. And these include pandemonium, anarch, archangelic, etc. Pandemonium, anarch, archangelic, etc. The word pandemonium was coined by Milton as the name for the capital of hell in Paradise Lost. So the word pandemonium appears in Paradise Lost and it refers to the capital of hell. So the word pandemonium means all demons. The word pandemonium means all demons. And Milton wrote an unfinished religious manifesto, that is, the Doctrina Christina, or we can say the Christian doctrine. Milton wrote an unfinished religious manifesto, the Doctrina Christina, or the Christian doctrine. John Dryden began the trend of describing Milton as the poet of the sublime. So it was John Dryden who first referred to Milton as the poet of the sublime. And William Blake placed Herman Spencer as Milton's precursor and saw himself as Milton's poetical son. So it is important to remember William Blake considered himself as the poetical son of John Milton. William Blake placed Herman Spencer as Milton's precursor. Remember, it is important. And William Blake saw himself as Milton's poetical son. And the famous literary critic Harold Bloom has something to say about Milton. And in the work The Anxiety of Influence. In The Anxiety of Influence, Harold Bloom says, Milton is the central problem in any theory and history of poetic influence in English. So according to Harold Bloom, in his book The Anxiety of Influence, John Milton is the central problem in any theory and history of poetic influence in English. And T.S. Eliot believed that of no other poet is it so difficult to consider the poetry simply as poetry, without our theological and political dispositions making unlawful entry. So according to T.S. Eliot, of no other poet is it so difficult to consider the poetry simply as poetry, without our theological and political dispositions making unlawful entry. Now let's be familiar with some of the titles taken from Milton's writings. So many writers took titles from Milton's poems. For example, Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials trilogy. So Philip Pullman has written a trilogy book and he titled it His Dark Materials, which is a phrase that appears in Milton's poem. And Thomas Wolfe, title Look Homeward Angel. Look Homeward Angel, written by Thomas Wolfe. The title is taken from John Milton's poem. And Aldous Huxley's work, Hylas in Gaza. Hylas in Gaza, a work written by Aldous Huxley. The title is taken from Milton. Arthur Koestler, Darkness at Noon. Darkness at Noon is a work written by Arthur Koestler and the title is taken from John Milton. William Golding's work, Darkness Visible. Darkness Visible, work written by William Golding, and this title is taken from John Milton's poem. Now let's be familiar with some of the works of John Milton. On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, on Shakespeare, on arriving at the age of 23, El Allegro, El Penseroso, a masque presented at the Ludlow Castle, 1634, which is commonly known as Comus. So the full title is Comus, a masque presented at Ludlow Castle. So remember the subtitle, Comus, a masque presented at Ludlow Castle, 1634. Then Lycidas, poems of Mr. John Milton, both English and Latin. When I consider how my light is spent, commonly referred to as On His Blindness, though Milton did not use this title. On the Late Massacre in Piedmont, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, poems upon several occasions, Arcades a Mask, on his deceased wife, To the Nightingale, on reaching the age of 24. Of Reformation, of Prelatical Episcopacy, Animadversions, the reason of church government urged against prelatry, Apology for Smectymnus, Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, Judgment of Martin Bucer concerning divorce, of Ericius, Areopagitica, Tetrachordon, Colasterion, the Tweener of Kings and Magistrates, Iconoclastes, Defensio pro Populo Anglicana, also called First Defense, Defensio Secunda, which is called Second Defense, a treatise of civil power, the likeliest means to remove hirelings from the church, the ready and easy way to establish a free commonwealth, Accidents Commenced Grammar, the History of Britain, Artis Logica Plena Institution, that means art of logic, of true religion, the Doctrina Christina, or the Christian doctrine. So once more, remember the works of John Milton on the morning of Christ's nativity, on Shakespeare, on arriving at the age of 23, Il Allegro, Il Penseroso, a masque presented at the Ludlow Castle 1634, commonly known as Comus. The full title is A Masque Comus, a masque presented at the Ludlow Castle 1634. Lycidas, poems of Mr. John Milton, both English and Latin. When I consider how my life is spent, commonly referred to as on his blindness, though John Milton never used this title. On the late massacre in Piedmont, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, poems upon several occasions, Arcades a Masque, on his deceased wife, To the Nightingale, on reaching the age of 24. On reformation of prelatical episcopacy, animadversions, the reason of church government urged against prelacy, apology for smectymnus, doctrine and discipline of divorce, judgment of Martin Bucer concerning divorce, of education, Areopagitica, Tetrachordon, Colasterion, the tenure of kings and magistrates, Iconoclastis, Defensio pro Populo Anglicano, which is called the first defense, Defensio Secunda, which is called the second defense, a treatise of civil power, the likeliest means to remove hirelings from the church, the ready and easy way to establish a free commonwealth, Accidents commenced the grammar, the history of Britain, Artis Logica Plena Institutia, that means the art of logic, of true religion, the Doctrina Christina, or the Christian doctrine. So that's all for now. In the next class, we will discuss the history of Indian English literature. A very, very important topic, the history of Indian English literature.